5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, ignition, liftoff.
Welcome. And thank you for joining us on the GHT Overland Podcast. This is where you get the greatest interviews and insights from overland travelers around the globe, learning from their stories and experiences as we interview overlanders from places like Australia, Africa, the Americas, Pakistan, and the UK. You'll learn the basics to the advanced in overlanding, so buckle up and get ready for a new adventure. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lisa.
Hey, Lisa, I have a question.
Yeah.
If you want to be a sheep farmer, who do you ask?
A sheep farmer?
Very good. If you want to learn about overlanding, who do you ask?
Ray Hyland.
That's right. Today, we have the guest of all guests, Ray Hyland. We met Ray at the Northwest Overland Rally. Lisa's going to give you the introduction, but Ray
is the man.
He has got the information on overlanding. This is a great interview. You guys are going to enjoy it, so let's get going.
So today's featured guest is Ray Hyland. We met Ray at the Northwest Overland Rally as he stopped to welcome us to the rally with a warm smile. Ray has been overlanding with his family since about 2004. In 2015, Ray, his wife, and 3 kids patched up a 1954 Land Rover Series 1 station wagon that hadn't run for 20 years. Shipped it to London, then drove it to Singapore to celebrate the 60th anniversary of the first London to Singapore overland journey.
I just want that to sink in. They purchased a 1954 Land Rover that was sitting in a field for 20 years and had not run. They basically patched it up and shipped it. You guys are going to love this story. That is great adventure. So without further ado, welcome to the podcast, Ray.
Thanks very much for having me. I've really been enjoying listening to the podcast, especially since you guys have interviewed a bunch of not only my friends, but people that I've found inspiring over the years. So it's an honor to be here.
Absolutely. We're honored to have you, and we really appreciate you taking the time. So fill us in on any details we may have missed in your intro, along with a little bit about your background.
Yeah, I'm Canadian by birth. Grew up around Vancouver. When I finished university, I went to Asia on what was intended to be a 2 or 3 month backpacking trip, and ended up staying there for about 15 years, and did a variety of stuff. Worked in primarily in the advertising industry, and moved to New York after about 15 years in Singapore. Was there for a number of years, and then in 2009 we retired and moved back to the Pacific Northwest, and we've just been enjoying doing odd little jobs, working in the overlanding industry, raising our 3 kids, and meeting really interesting people.
That's awesome. That's very good. So what inspired your overland adventures?
I think like a lot of people who got into old Land Rovers, I was a passionate fan of the Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom when I was a kid.
Oh yeah.
And you'd see these old Land Rovers chasing gazelles through the savannah and that type of thing. But then when I was working in Singapore, and we had 3 little kids, 3 kids under 3, and we had an old antique Mercedes Benz that used to break down every time my wife drove it. And so my wife and my in-laws were encouraging me to get a minivan, and I didn't really think I was the minivan type. And I was out looking at vehicles, and I ended up finding a Defender 110. And I brought it home, and the rest of the family said, "What's this?" And I said, "This is the world's greatest minivan." And that kind of, we met the local Land Rover Club and we started going on trips. We started out with little weekend trips into the jungles around Singapore. And then that translated into larger and larger trips, and we started going up into the NW rainforests and Mat Daling areas of peninsular Malaysia. And we started going out for a couple of weeks at a time, and we loved it. We loved the idea of exploring places that people hadn't seen for maybe 30 or 40 years, old logging tracks that had been abandoned, and getting out there and seeing just wilderness and animals and different people. I mean, when you get off the beaten track in Southeast Asia, you run into indigenous tribes, you run into amazing little hidden waterfalls and elephants and monkeys and snakes and all sorts of stuff. So it really is a bit of an adventure. So that's what got us hooked.
So with your new purchase of your newest family minivan, when was your first overland trip?
I think the first one, which I would consider like as a true trip, like a serious trip, would be probably in 2005. We did a trip called the Mat Daling Trek. The Mat Daling was an old trail which went through the central spine of the jungle of peninsular Malaysia, and it was a logging road originally, probably abandoned 40 years earlier. And since then, no maintenance had been done on it. And local indigenous tribes, the Orang Asli people, had villages throughout there. And their primary mode of transportation was the Honda Cub scooter. And so most of this trip was now like single track. And so we had heard a rumor that the Malaysian government was going to pave this track. They were going to open it back up and pave it in the next couple of years. So we wanted to drive it before that happened. So we went out with a group of 4 friends, and we spent a couple of weeks driving the entire length of this old route through the jungle. And yeah, it was, the bridges were all washed out. We were like winching through rivers that were up to the windshields, and camping out in the jungle, and buying chickens off of the villagers, and just having a pretty fantastic time. It was a once in a lifetime experience.
That's awesome. So, Ray, tell us a little bit more about that 1954 Land Rover and maybe any name that you gave it.
We called it all sorts of terrible things that I can't repeat on our podcast. But yeah, it's a 54 station wagon. It's the short one, the 86-inch wheelbase. So it's smaller than a Volkswagen Beetle, and we packed all 5 of us and all of our gear into that thing for the 9-month trip. When I found it, it had been abandoned for at least 20 years, sitting in a field. It had no seats, no doors, no windows, and it didn't run. And so we dragged it home, got it running. I purposely didn't restore it. Well, purposely is a big word. We chose not to restore it, to probably a combination of apathy and procrastination and a misguided sense of adventure. And so yeah, this is a $300 wreck that we dragged home.
Wow.
And we got it running. We found a set of old doors and some windows, which we put in. I got a set of old worn out front seats from a donor vehicle, but they had fallen apart, so I took a couple of hand towels and folded them and put them on the front seats and strapped a piece of canvas over them with some rubber bands, just to give us a little bit of padding. And then in the back, there was the original side-facing seats were no longer there. So I found a Chevy Astrovan bench seat on Craigslist for about $25, and I threw that in the back for the kids, bolted it in properly, and got some seatbelts put in. And so the kids had the most comfortable seats in the house. And yeah,
seats.
And that was kind of it. I had a neighbor who helped me weld together a little aluminum roof rack, which we threw on the top. Each one of us had one small duffel bag, a little dry bag, which was supposed to carry all of your clothing, your personal entertainment, your schooling if you were still in school, your pillow, your sleeping pad, and your sleeping bag. So we got an ultralight sleeping setup. And so so everybody had one little bag, and that was like strapped onto the roof rack with a couple of ratchet straps every morning, and off we went.
That's amazing.
So it takes me back to like the Flintstone style.
Flintstone style. I don't know if that would go that
Pretty
far.
much. I think actually, if we were pushing with our feet out the bottom, we would have gone faster.
So what is your current overland vehicle of choice?
That's kind of a hard question. We have a bit of a overland vehicle addiction here in our house. But I have a 93 Defender 110 with a 200 TDI diesel that has an AT Overland Habitat top on it, which is awesome. It opens up to a huge 6-person tent. We have a Range Rover, 1988 Range Rover, the first year they were brought to North America with the coil springs and the simple ignition and everything, before they got complicated and difficult to fix in the field. And I drove that one up to Tuktoyaktuk last year, which is a lot of fun. And then we have a number of, I think we have currently 5 old Series 1 station wagons and pickups and stuff.
Okay.
So yeah,
awesome.
There's a little selection there. There's a small fleet growing in the field beside the house.
That's great. So in general, what is the one thing you value the most when you go on an overland trip that you just no longer would go without?
There's one tool I always carry, which is a Pulaski axe. And I've been using one of those forever, and it's basically it's an axe on one end, and it's a trenching tool on the other end, and you can use that for clearing brush and digging holes, and just basically getting yourself out of any situation you find in the bush. As long as you have the energy to dig or chop, you can pretty much build a road or clear a path. So it's kind of my backcountry multi-tool that lives in the back of the truck.
Okay.
Last week I drove up to the Arctic, or not quite to the Arctic, up to the edge of the Alaska Panhandle to do a quick job, and I was in a Dodge rental car, Durango, terrible car. But the one thing that I packed, other than the survey tools that I was going to be using on the job, was my Pulaski axe. So that's kind of one piece of gear that seems to go everywhere with us.
Okay, you just don't leave home without.
Yeah.
Anything you originally packed on those first overland trips that you never used or removed from your overall setup?
Yeah, I guess it kind of changes according to how long we think we're going to be going on every trip. On the London to Singapore trip, we packed one of those little portable toilet seats, and we ended up never using it all. Just everybody got used to the fact of walking into the trees with a shovel. So the little portable toilet ended up strapped on the roof rack for 9 months, and then went into a box when we got home.
Oh, and you brought it all the way back home.
Yeah,
That's great.
yeah. Well, when we shipped the truck home, everything that was in the truck at the time just stayed with the truck. So.
Okay, awesome. So Ray, with all the places that you've been, what are your current top 2 or 3 destinations, along with a little detail on what made them so special for you?
I think the Darjeeling region of northern India on the Nepalese border, that was definitely a high point, one of my favorite places, because it is it's the Himalayan foothills. The views are spectacular. The main highways are the width of an F-350, and the average road is the size of a Volkswagen. And they are just little spiderweb roads that just wind up and down the mountains. And there's a surprise around every corner, whether it's a village or a little house clinging to the cliffside or a herd of goats running down the middle of the path. I mean, you never know what you're going to find, but it's always gorgeous, and it's always a surprise, and the people there are just wonderful. And of course, the Darjeeling region is where tea, a lot of tea comes from that region, and so that area was originally cultivated in the 50s by these big British companies for their tea plantations, and so they all had Series 1 Land Rovers. And so when you drive around the region in an old Series 1 Land Rover like we did, you run into tons of them, and it's really fun because people will flag you down. Old guys will flag you down the road and say, I spent 40 years of my career driving one of those. And so that was really special for us. I think another area that we found was unbelievably friendly was Iran. We heard all sorts of scary stories about Iran before we went on our trip, and we're like, should we go to Iran? You know, what's it going to be like? And when we got there, it was incredible. The people were among the friendliest we've met anywhere in the world. They would just flag you down on the road when they saw your license plate being from, you know, North America, and just said, "Wow, we are so excited and happy that you came to visit our country,
Oh,
and we
wow. How
want
great
to
is that?
let you know." Yeah, and they just said, you know, we want to tell the world that our country does not represent us as a people. And they would welcome us into their homes and feed us dinner and you know, show us around and take us on trips. And yeah, so we spent a month in Iran, and it was really, really special.
That's awesome. Any others that really stand out to you?
You know, I think obviously the American Southwest is really special. I mean, you know, if anybody's ever spent some time exploring, you know, Colorado, Utah, northern Arizona, that whole area where it's just canyons and red rocks and spires and buttes, and it's just, you know, again, around every corner you find something spectacular. I think one of the secrets there is remembering to get out of the truck.
Oh, sure.
It's easy to just drive around the Southwest and just keep looking out the window and going, wow, this is amazing. But if you park and you climb up the cliffside and onto the top of the plateaus and stuff, and you find these ancient villages and little campsites and paths and trails, and it becomes really special. So that's, I think, you know, if you're going to explore that area, I'd say, you know, make sure you set enough time aside that you can get out of the truck and explore by foot, because the views get even better.
Great advice.
And then, yeah, and I think one of the last ones I would say, and especially in North America, is the high Arctic. So the areas up in northern Northwest Territories and in northern Alaska are fantastic. I think one of the most scenic areas that I ever traveled through was the Brooks Range in northern Alaska in the winter, and just blazing sun and these young, really sharp and aggressive mountain range coming straight out of the plains, and everything's covered in snow, and the way the roads are constructed, you're not taking the valleys, you go right over top, so the views there are just breathtaking.
Oh, wow.
Awesome.
Like 360 view degrees?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
Yeah, it
wow.
feels like you're literally standing on top of the world.
Awesome.
And again, if you get out of the truck and you spend 10 minutes with the engine turned off, and you get used to the stillness, and you think it's a completely empty environment, and then you start seeing ptarmigan and snowy owls and Arctic foxes hunting in the snow, and it's really cool.
That's awesome.
Tell us about your kitchen setup during your London to Singapore trip.
Well, again, we were traveling pretty light, so we spent a lot of time planning that kitchen setup. And my wife is Singaporean, so as a family, we eat a lot of Asian-influenced cuisine and a lot of rice. And if you've ever tried to cook rice properly in a standard camp pot, like the little MSR pots you get, those pots are great, but they're like thin wall titanium. So things that need to simmer like rice usually will burn on the bottom. And so you need a thick pot that is that's really big. But of course, you know, in a little tiny truck like that, you want to conserve weight. So we managed to order an anodized aluminum cooking pot from Snow Peak. We figured if there's one company that makes camping gear that understands how to make rice, it's going to be Snow Peak from Japan.
There you go.
And so they have a rice pot, which is a huge pot that you can cook a one pot meal for 5 people in easily. And the base of the pot, that aluminum base, is at least 5/8 of an inch thick, so you can easily cook in it. And then we also bought an MSR Dragonfly stove, and the Dragonfly is a pretty legendary stove in the backpacking community. It runs on pretty much any fuel you want to put into it, diesel or kerosene or white gas or unleaded fuel, and but it can actually simmer. It's one of the only multi-fuel stoves you can get that you can turn it down to a true simmer. And so we were able to just use the unleaded gasoline that we were using in the truck in the stove for the whole trip. So we had this little Dragonfly stove, and we had our huge pot, and we had a couple of little pans with us for side dishes, but that was pretty much it. Yeah, it was a really simple but really efficient kitchen setup.
There you go. All right.
What's a favorite meal on the road, either quick and easy or something more elaborate?
I guess it depends on how much time we have, but if we do have the time, we love to do something a little bit more elaborate. And it doesn't have to be super fancy, but we enjoy getting the kitchen set up and standing around and talking about our day and telling stories and just enjoying the piece of being out of the vehicle and spending that time working together to make a meal. So, and often we'll make things up according to what we find when we're traveling. Like in that little series 1, there was no room for a cooler or a fridge or anything, so we would buy food every day. So breakfast, lunch, and dinner was determined by what we happened to come across in the course of our travel. So we ate like locals as much as we could. And so we would find random ingredients along the roadside, and we would put them together and try and figure out how to make it into dinner. And it was actually a lot of fun.
It sounds like it. So if you were able to get groceries like every day, were you not concerned about getting more supplies if you weren't able to get groceries every day?
We carried a bag of rice with us, and we had a few cans always in the truck if we couldn't find food, and we would dip into that and then replenish it as we went, as needed. But as much as we could, we would try to buy some fresh stuff along the way. And you can be in a very, very remote part of the world. As long as humans live there, there's going to be food available. And so, sometimes that doesn't look like what you're used to. Sometimes, you're in a small town and there is nothing that looks like a supermarket, but if you can use Google Translate or you're basically playing charades with people on the roadside and telling them you're looking for food, they're going to direct you to the one house in the village that has some food available. And
Okay.
that might be a couple of cans of a fish you've never seen before in your life, and it might be a couple of vegetables, and and you make it work. And yeah, we never starved. We always enjoyed it. It was always a bit of an adventure.
Okay. Any tips that you've got for purchasing fresh meats and vegetables from those small towns or villages?
I would say always buy the stuff that everybody else is eating, because that's the stuff that is moving, so it's fresh. If you walk into a little store and they have lots of local stuff that you can't recognize, but that's what all the villagers are eating. And then they've got one or two pieces of something that you do recognize, but it looks like it may have been there for a while. Go with the local option, because it's only when you don't eat like a local usually that you get ill.
Got it.
Interesting. How do you generally do your laundry on the road?
Well, on a big trip, we've kind of consolidated with a couple of brands. For anything kind of underwear related, we use the Ex Officio stuff. So boxer shorts and t-shirts and everything like that. The Ex Officio wash and go stuff is fantastic. You basically just you take a t-shirt and you put it in some soapy water and you rinse it around and you wring it out and you hang it up and it's dry in an hour. So that's super, super handy. And then we, for outerwear, we went with, and I love this stuff. It's from a company called Pickpocket Proof Pants, and they make pants and shirts that looks just like a normal dress shirt, for example, except it has hidden pockets in it, so you can put your passport and your money and stuff, and it's all tucked away safe.
Ooh, nice.
Because our truck was so old it didn't even have locks on the doors, right? So anything of value we just carried with us. And so having some quick dry easy wash clothing that had lots of little hidden pockets was great. It made you feel secure, but it also just made it convenient to bring anything of value with you. So the pickpocket proof shirt, for example, which is kind of my go-to overlanding uniform. It just looks like a white dress shirt, but it's made out of nylon, so it breathes easy. It washes in a sink or in a little dry bag, and then again it's like dry in an hour. And so if you have a couple of dry bags along with you for carrying your gear, and it's super super easy to do some laundry. You just pour some water into the dry bag and throw your throw your dirty laundry into it, and you shake it up for 20 minutes, and then you rinse it out, and you're done. And then what a lot of people will do is they'll take a dry bag if they've got an extra one. They put a bit of water and a little bit of soap into it with some clothing, and then when you seal it with lots of air in it, so it's blown up like a balloon. Strap it to your roof rack, and then as you drive along all day, it's going to do your laundry while you're driving, and then in the evening you just rinse it and hang it.
Okay,
Nice.
perfect. And do you find that the material on those hold up for a long period of time?
Oh yeah, they've been great.
Okay.
I've never even lost a button on one of them.
Oh, wow.
They're
Okay.
unbelievably well made. It's a really small company based out of New York. So the shirts aren't cheap, but you totally get what you pay for.
Okay.
And I kind of like not dressing like a lion tamer when I travel.
Yes.
So I find a pair of khaki pants and a white dress shirt. I can be walking down the sidewalk pretty much anywhere in the world, and people just assume I'm a local expat who's on my lunch break,
Okay.
right? I'm not really dressed like a tourist, and I kind of appreciate that.
Yep. Okay, perfect.
And hygiene. Do you have a shower and toilet setup, or what's your recommendation for keeping it simple and hygienic on the road?
Well, I think we learned about the toilet setup.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah,
He carries the
yeah.
seat
I
with
think
him.
a shovel or my Pulaski axe, which is it has a hoe on one end, right? A trenching tool, so that's super convenient. And then make sure you bring a large quantity of wet wipes with you. And wet wipes are the God's gift to overlanders. For cleaning your hands after you've worked on your truck, or before the family sits down to dinner, or just giving yourself a quick sponge bath if there's nothing else available to you. Wet wipes are handy in the tent. And then we did bring a little solar shower with us, a little solar setup, and that was handy. We didn't use it all that much, but on the times when we were camped for a while and we had the opportunity, it was a great option. We use on the London to Singapore trip, we just brought a little simple shower, which is made actually right here in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
And you just slip it into a Coke bottle and it works great. But on longer trips where we have a bit more space, we have one of the Nemo Helio showers, which has a little foot pump.
Yep.
And a hand release valve, and those things are fantastic. Not only as a shower, but for washing dishes and just washing up around camp. It's super handy.
Cool. Anything you'd change about that setup if you were to do that trip again, the London to Singapore?
Not really. I think it's worked pretty well for us. I mean, honestly, if we're in a campsite or something, the other thing that I usually bring along with me is an antibacterial hand towel, and those are great because you can just dip it in some hot water that you've heated on the stove and give yourself a really thorough wash down, and then hang it up. But those antibacterial towels are great because even if you have to toss it back into the truck and it's damp, they don't smell. Because they're treated with some antibacterial compound, they remain odor free for, I don't know, like a year. So that's really nice to have.
Yeah, that would be. Wow. Okay, cool. So, Ray, what has been your number one biggest challenge you've had to overcome during your overland trips?
I think the biggest challenge has always been not letting my concerns for my family keep us from going to the more adventurous places. As someone who likes to go on adventures, that's great, and I'm usually the first person to put myself into a completely inappropriate situation. But when you're a dad and you're traveling with your kids, there's always this urge to say, that looks a little sketchy. Maybe we won't go that way. But at the same time, I also realize that, my kids are on these adventures too, and some of these trips that they're doing maybe once in a lifetime. So I shouldn't be preventing them from also being able to look back and having that amazing experience. So that's a challenge. I think that's one of the biggest challenges is figuring out how do you walk that tightrope from letting your kids enjoy that experience that they'll be talking about 20 years from now, versus being the responsible dad who keeps them out of danger, right?
Yeah,
So
that would be really, really tough.
yeah, but that's it's going to be a different challenge for every person, right? There's no right or wrong answer there. It's whatever your comfort level is.
Yeah, very true. Tell us about your process for planning your overland trips, like if you've come up with a specific way that you find that works pretty good, along with either a daily or weekly planning that you possibly do.
This is one of those ones where you kind of need to talk to my wife and I almost together on this one, because when we travel as a group, as a family, my wife is a planner. And so if we know where we're going ahead of time, she will make a plan. She will start, planning out how the boxes are going to be packed, a couple of weeks ahead of time. And I'm the opposite. My plan is we're going to go somewhere cool. We're going to leave next week. Usually the morning of the trip, I frantically look for my gear and I throw it loosely in the back of the truck, and then I go. And so we have very different styles. And so my approach has always been a little loose, and it's often a point of tension with my wife because she plans a lot differently. But somehow together we seem to make it work.
Well, it probably creates that balance between the two.
I was just
I mean, like when we went to London to Singapore, and I mean it was a huge trip. The truck was not restored. I only brought a few basic hand tools with me. I didn't really know the route. I didn't even buy a map.
Awesome.
We just got in the car in London and said, all right, let's drive to Singapore. And I pulled up my iPhone and said, so how do we get to the ferry? And that was kind of the start of it. And so we navigated halfway around the world using the free Maps.me app on my iPhone.
There you go. Nothing too fancy, and you don't need to have 6 months of planning.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you plan too hard, everything just gets a little monotonous. I mean, and I recognize a lot of people like to have a lot of planning, but on our big London to Singapore trip, we honestly had no idea if we were going to make it. We didn't know if the truck was going to blow up or catch fire halfway through the trip. And our backup plan was, take the license plates off, light it on fire, and buy a bus ticket. And so and as we like to say, it's not really an adventure if you know you're going to make it.
Definitely the process you take, isn't it? Border crossings, what tips do you have in preparing for them?
Border crossings will be tedious and confusing, and they're purposely set up to be tedious and confusing.
Some of the best advice and the greatest border crossing story to come next week, but some great advice and just wonderful, fun stories to listen to with Ray, from a man that knows and has gone out there and done, I mean, London to Singapore. That was just a great episode. And I had never heard of a Polaxiax before. I don't know if that's super bad, but I mean, I consider that I've been around the block a few times. So that was good. It was a lot of good education. What did you get out of that one, Lisa?
Well, I think we should get a Polaxiax.
A Polaxiax and lots of wet wipes?
Yes. Sounds like it's gotten him out of numerous situations.
Well, opposed to taking an axe and a shovel, you just take that and you're good to go. So, pretty ingenious.
Yeah.
Wise man. And what did you think of Iran? I wasn't expecting that. Well, that's not really fair. I think we've heard that one or two times before, but I thought it was really interesting that the Iranian people had told him, we just want the world to know that our country does not represent us as a people. And they were so thankful that they were there to visit and to actually see what normal life is like there. And they spent a month there.
Well, I think they had dinner with different families and were invited in.
Yeah, I think when you go out into the world and you adventure and you overland and find these places and talk and get to know some of these people, you find out that it's CNN and Fox, and bless their hearts for spreading news, but they really only focus on the bad parts.
Yeah, the locals know.
Locals know. Good point. Another thing that really stuck out to me was get out of the truck and adventure. Walk past the vehicle, and you'll really see the environment that you're in open up in front of you.
You're traveling from north, ice cold Arctic area, over to Iran, Singapore, all over.
Yep, great episode. Really looking forward to next week. Ray's stories, they leave us with that deer in the headlights look when he's telling them. Just a great. We're so humbled that he took the time to talk with us and to share a lot of his knowledge and his wonderful stories. So we hope that you enjoyed that as much as we did, and I hope you're looking forward to next week's episode as much as we are.
Our interview with Ray is our longer format interview, so we split these into 2 episodes for your downloading pleasure. Don't worry, new episodes are released each Thursday.
In next week's episode, we finish talking about border crossings, along with that most epic border crossing story, like no joke, that you've ever heard. More on navigation and communication, plus all the finer details of Ray's overlanding setup.
It's a good idea to visit the show notes page on our website at ghteoverland.com/podcast. Select the Ray Hyland episode. All the details and helpful links are already there for you.
Yep, and send any suggestions or questions or feedback to ghteoverlandpodcast@gmail.com. If you have an Amazon Echo, be sure to tell Alexa, play the GHT Overland Podcast. And we would love it if you would connect with us on social media. You'll find us at GHT Overland. Surprise, surprise. Be sure to share the episode with your friends who enjoy travel off the beaten path. We would greatly, greatly appreciate that. Overland travel is all about meeting new friends, seeing the most amazing places on Earth, and of course, new food and new drinks.
Do you have a favorite drink or food recipe for overlanding? We'd love to feature it and you. Send them to ghteoverlandpodcast@gmail.com. Before you race off, it would mean the world to us if you rate and review the podcast. Give GHT Overland a little podcast love so we could reach as many overlanders as possible. Thank you, and we will see you next Thursday for part 2 of the GHT Overland Podcast with Ray Hyland. Bye!